Welcome to Creative Piecemeal. I'm Tammy Takaishi, a board-certified music therapist. Join me each week as a new guest from across the fine and creative arts spheres shares struggles, triumphs, laughs, words of wisdom, and more in authentic, thought-provoking, and inspiring interviews. Hello and welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast. Today I'm here with Janet Horvath. She is the Associate Principal Cellist of the Minnesota Orchestra from 1980 to 2012 and is a soloist, writer, and award-winning advocate for injury prevention for musicians. She's also appeared internationally in recitals as a soloist and has given seminars for colleges, conservatories, and to organizations from coast to coast. Her book, The Cello Still Sings, A Generational Story of the Holocaust and of the Transformational Power of Music, was released in February of 2023 and is available worldwide. Janet, a pleasure to have you on the show. As we were talking before I hit record, I'm a fan of yours. I love how you instill the cello and string community with your wisdom, your advice, your practice tips, and everything. So it's really great to officially meet you and have you on the show. So
thank you so much for inviting me.
A pleasure, a pleasure. So I'd love to get started with, how did you become inspired to become a musician?
I didn't have a choice, actually. My father was a professional cellist. He was in the Toronto Symphony for 38 years. And my mother was a wonderful, almost scary piano teacher. Her students adored her. And so music permeated our home. And it seemed like the cello was my voice.
Have you ever dabbled in other instruments just for fun, or was it always cello?
I played the piano for many years as well. Yeah, but it was obvious that it was the cello that was making me, sending me, musically. So
yeah. Of all the instruments I play, the cello is my favorite. So I'd love to talk about your book. It came out almost a year ago. Obviously, it's a very personal story, but I'm curious to know, what made you decide to sit down and write it, and how has that changed how your life has gone since the book's gone out?
Well, I have written a previous book, Playing Less Hurt, an Injury Prevention Guide for Musicians. So it wasn't as if I had no experience writing. I've been writing my whole life. But this story was a secret. My parents were Holocaust survivors from Budapest, Hungary, and they never spoke about it. Although as children, we gleaned that there was something terrible that had happened, and that we knew, without being told as much, that we had to live for those who didn't, and we had to succeed in ways our parents couldn't. And I had tried over the years to get a few of the stories. And of course, as a reader and as growing up, I had sometimes tried to read everything I could on the subject. And then I tried to read, I didn't want to know everything. I was afraid to know all the details. So, it was kind of this back and forth. And over the years, some little tidbits of the past secrets would sometimes slip out, but there was never any coherent understanding of what had happened until it was the last year of my father's life at age 87, although, of course, I didn't know it then. And I was in Toronto. I'm from Toronto, Canada, but I live in, obviously, the Twin Cities. And I was constantly going back and forth, trying to take care of their needs. And this was a yucky, slushy January day, a little bit like what's starting to happen here in the Twin Cities. And I was driving my father to yet another doctor appointment. And I got him down the elevator and into the car and loaded the walker and sat down next to him. And I sighed and I thought, okay, it's going to be a long drive. My father could be difficult to speak to as just making small talk. And I thought, okay, what should I talk about? Well, of course, my father loved to talk shop. He had played with all the most famous maestros in Europe in the Budapest Symphony as a very young man before the war. And he'd played with all the famous guys like Sir Thomas Beecham and Barbaroli and Toscanini. But I never really asked him about my own personal idol. So we start driving and I'm, trying to, keep steady in the car because it was icy. And I said, Dad, did you ever play with Leonard Bernstein? And suddenly it seemed like he passed out. He put his hand to his cheek and his eyes seemed to roll into the back of his head. And I thought, yikes, should I pull over? Like, what happened? And I keep going for a couple more minutes. And then it's as if he comes to and he says, totally different personality. Yes, it was a very hot day. It was in the displaced persons camps in Germany in 1948. And he came and he was just a kid and he played Rhapsody in Blue and it was just fantastic. And I talked to him. I said, I want to come to America. And before I could get my tongue around all the questions I had, which was, okay, what were you doing in Germany after the war? And was my mother with you? And where did you get a cello? And how did you have the strength to play? He shook his head gravely, huddled to the side of the car. And it was as if either the memory left him or he was reluctant to go further speaking. So I got him to the doctor. I got him home, got him tucked in, and then raced to Google. And I thought, surely there's some kind of newspaper article or something about this occasion. And sure enough, I stumbled on the fact that my father had remembered the entire program, all the works. He always remembered the music. And I stumbled on the name of the singer on the program. And he had Dermashkin Gurko. And I thought, okay, how many of those could there be? And I find her name and find out that she had a printed program and it was donated to the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City. I thought, oh, gosh, a printed program? I wrote to the museum and I told them my father had been in this group. And they wrote me right back and said, yes, Janet, next time you're in New York, please make an appointment. We'd be happy to show you the program in our archives. But don't you want to see the live video testimony and the photographs? So that's when I started screaming, wow. And luckily, shortly thereafter, the Minnesota Orchestra had a tour to Carnegie Hall. So we were doing a run out, fly in, go to sleep, get up, have a rehearsal, play the concert and fly home. There was just a little window of opportunity to get down to the museum early in the morning. And I go to the museum. The archivist meets me and dons white gloves all the way up to her elbows and reaches into these tiny archival boxes. And she pulls out these 4 teeny tiny black and white photographs. And there's my father standing next to Leonard Bernstein with 17 other members of the orchestra. And I realized I had thought orchestra's got to be orchestra like 100 members like I was in. No, it was 17 survivors, Holocaust survivors, Jewish people who met at the Benedictine monastery that's outside of Munich. And they played their first concert there, in fact. And I just couldn't believe that I find pictures and the photographs, photographs in the program. When I called my father, I said, I found these photographs and, you're in them. And I blew them up. I was able to procure rights to get a copy of them, and I blew them up to poster size. And on a subsequent trip, took them to Toronto, not knowing whether my father would remember anything, whether he would be mad at me for bringing this up, whether he would give me more information. I didn't know how he would feel about it. And thankfully, he did remember, and he was so excited. And he says, here is Chaim Arbeitman. He changed his name to David Arbit. He got in the Philadelphia Orchestra. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, I sat with him all the time on the bus. I said, what do you mean all the time on the bus? Because I knew May 10th, 1948 were the 2 concerts with Leonard Bernstein. And so out it comes that my father and this small group were bused twice a week all over Bavaria, bringing morale-boosting programs to those still languishing in the displaced persons camps, waiting for news of loved ones, waiting for the right paperwork to emigrate somewhere, if someone would take them. And he played 200 concerts in 100 displaced persons camps over a 2-year period. So I thought, this is really an incredible story and needs to be told. And so I start the book with that car ride and asking my father the question. And I write the book as it unfolded for me. So gradually I get more clues, I get more information, I find pictures, I find the program, I find archival documents. And because my father, his health starts failing and he starts realizing how much I really want to know, that he starts scribbling late at night. His caregiver calls me and says, I don't know what he's doing. He can hardly write by this point, but maybe you should ask him. And the next time I'm in Toronto, which is a few months later, he is formally sitting at the dining room table with dark scrawl on these pieces of paper. And Janet came, you sit down, I read this to you. And I'm thinking, well, what could be so urgent? Tax records or insurance papers. And he starts reading in Hungarian, which thankfully I speak a little bit, his testimony. Here I read my testimony to you of what happened to me. And he died 6 weeks later. So I feel extremely fortunate to have his story. And from there, I did tons of research, going to archives and going to Hungary and tracing his steps. So but it's not all horror. A lot of it is after the war, and it's mainly how it all affected my brother and I growing up. But it's also lots of stories of being a cellist whose father's a cellist who tries to teach me, and I cry and he yells, and and audition stories. There's quite a lot of humor. My mother was an amazing cook, and Hungarian food is just the best. So there's lots of food stories that will make you hungry and so on. Yeah, so I really wanted to introduce this material in a way that people who wouldn't necessarily pick up a so-called Holocaust book would have an entry point through music, through the cello, through maybe knowing me, through wanting to know this particular story about Leonard Bernstein. And that has been the case, which I'm very gratified about.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
If you've been feeling burned out, stressed, overwhelmed, or exhausted, the resources and courses at the Self-Care Institute are here to support you. The Self-Care Institute was founded by Dr. Ami Kunimura and provides support for individuals and organizations with burnout prevention, burnout recovery, and stress management. I've personally taken a few of these courses and found them to be super helpful, both professionally and personally. The care you give yourself matters just as much as the care you give to others. But if self-care is difficult for you, you're not alone. And the Self-Care Institute is here to support your well-being, resilience, and sense of fulfillment at work and at home. For more information, visit selfcareinstitute.com or go to the show notes and click on the link. Excellent. It's so beautiful. I mean, I have not had a chance to read it, but I'm so excited and can't wait to dig in. And I also plan to give some extra copies away to listeners. But I can only imagine how special it was for you to be able to have that time with your father and learn more about him, learn more about how his life was shaped, his musical life was shaped. What a gift, even though it was during turbulent times, what a gift to find out more about what he went through.
Yeah, and also he continued what he did after the war in Germany, now in Toronto. I mean, both my parents were very dedicated to making this a more beautiful world through music, through their teaching, through giving to the next generation, giving people solace. So yeah, it was a real blessing to get this story, and then to spend a lot of time putting it together and trying to decide how to make the story resonate with people.
Yeah. What is one of your favorite parts of that story now that it's come to completion?
Well, there's a lot of different ones. There are some great funny stories, as I mentioned, and usually in a presentation, I read at least one of them and get lots of laughs. The thing that really was important for me was that it was cathartic for me. It was a way to really become aware of why my parents behaved the way they did, and then why those of us that are G2, we call ourselves the next generation, many of us carry genetically these traumas. Even though we weren't there, we live these experiences in our genes, through our genes. It's become a whole study as how trauma is passed on in the following generations. And so I learned a lot about myself and my idiosyncrasies. So that was really important. And the discoveries that it was as if they were meant to be. They fell in my lap, certain things, documents that I could uncover that I would never have imagined would come to pass.
Yeah. I was wondering, what sort of reception have you gotten from it? Like, have other people written to you and said, oh, because of this, I have a better understanding of what happened in history, or because of this, I'm inspired to ask my parents about their past, or things of that nature?
Tons of them. I've even got a long email from someone today, which is fantastic, that people are saying that it's encouraged them to ask the questions before it's too late. Because so often when we're young, we're busy with, we're getting our jobs, we're, establishing ourselves, we're having kids, whatever. And we're either too busy or not paying attention to the fact that there are important lessons to learn from the past. And many of us become really interested when our parents are already either, really aging or already gone, which is too bad. It's really too bad. So, it's been quite a journey. My favorite thing is the conversations afterwards, after I give a presentation, because that's what matters to me. Having conversation, bringing people together, seeing how we can try to ameliorate things that are going on in the world, even right now. It's just been heartening and inspiring to hear what people have to say. I've gotten really, really good reviews. I've won several awards. Yeah. If you, know any movie makers, please go ahead. I'm kidding. But it's been quite a journey. I've given 68 presentations, and I have several of them next year. And it's everything from 8 people to 10 people at a private book club group, either in person or on Zoom, somewhere else. I've traveled all over the country doing presentations. Yeah, it's uniformly been really inspiring.
That's fantastic. And I'm so glad that you've had the opportunity to share your family's story with the world, and that I feel like, especially now, it becomes more and more important to remember history and, really the lessons learned from it, for sure. So
the scary thing is that statistics are now coming out with the fact that a lot of young people are not reading books cover to cover. And if they don't, I don't know how you get an in-depth, not only understanding of history, but as the escape to another culture. Not all of us can be traveling all over the world, to have an understanding of what other people feel and think and experience, and then discovering that their hopes and dreams are just like ours. They're the same. We're the same. We're more the same than different. And I think the empathy that a book creates for people is really something that we're going to miss if people don't read. Fortunately, a lot of books are being put into audiobooks, and mine is as well. And just a little plug, there's a 60% off deal on the audiobook in December this month. So if you want to do that, please take advantage. It's really important to broaden your horizons, or we're going to continue to be in trouble in the future.
On a slightly lighter note, what is a piece of advice that you carry with you from your family? Whether it's music advice, life advice, both.
Well, the most important advice is to reach out to others. And that can be through a conversation one-on-one. It can be through performing for small or big audiences. It can be being creative and really, having confidence in yourself that you have something to say. And all of us are important. So a lot of those feelings came directly from my parents.
Yes. And those are such great and important lessons, and sometimes in life, we get down on ourselves and we forget how important it is that we can shine a light for other people, so it's wonderful that you had that opportunity to learn that and remember that and get that instilled,
Yeah, this I feel my book is really much more my legacy than my 32 years with the Minnesota Orchestra. I played some great concerts with great artists. I did a lot of solo playing, but this is different. This is something you can hold and kiss and look at, but, also that it's tangible and will hopefully be around after I'm not, for whatever that's worth. Hopefully it keeps going.
Yeah. A very important piece of history for sure.
Yeah.
I was wondering, what is one of your favorite pieces to play on cello?
Oh boy. I usually say it's the piece I'm playing because it's very hard to differentiate between great works. I love playing Brahms, especially chamber music. I love the Beethoven cello sonatas, and I played them a lot. There's some, I love playing Prokofiev in the orchestra, some of those works that, really resonate. There's so many things. And I just feel really privileged to not only have played all those things, but I continue to hear them and study them and learn new works and learn about them. And that's fun too.
And you also wrote another book, Playing Less Hurt, an Injury Prevention Guide for Musicians. Now, was that based on any specific injury that you had, or were you just wanting to provide people with information that you'd learned over the years?
Oh, so I tell the story that when I was a Starker student, who was the great cello teacher and performer and like one of the greatest artists of his generation, really, he taught at Indiana University, and I was terrified to go to him. He was scary, and when I got there, it was my first time away from home. From Toronto, and I was living in a dorm, which I didn't really appreciate. And I decided that I wanted to be the best Starker student who ever lived. And so I practiced, and I locked myself in a practice room. I didn't want to lose my practice room. There weren't that many of them. And I practiced and didn't take a break. Didn't want to lose my room. My arm started hurting. And I thought, no, I'd be hurt, and then it continued to hurt. And I thought, okay, no pain, no gain, right? That's what we believe then. I'm going to be a better musician, aren't I? If I play through the pain, which I couldn't have been more wrong. So it turns out that at that time, Starker was on a tour. And so he wasn't around. And I just was grinding myself into the ground, basically. And I got to the point, people don't realize how painful and debilitating these injuries can get if you let them, if you don't listen to the danger signals. So I couldn't use a knife and fork. I couldn't carry a tray in the cafeteria. I couldn't wash my hair to hold my arms up like this. It can be that debilitating. And I saw about a dozen doctors at the time. It was very new. We didn't even know that, injuries can happen in athletes. We talked about no pain, no gain, even for them too. So I don't really fault the doctors so much as I did then when I got comments like, oh, how can it hurt to play? For them to imagine that it was all fun and games and not really very athletic. Or you musicians, you're so sensitive, maybe even hysterical. Could it all be in your head? No. Or you should try doing something else, which of course went over really big with me. So it took a long time to figure out what to do. Starker came back from his tour and was horrified, but he hid it quite well. And I started again from the ground up, trying to eliminate tension, trying to play with ease and natural postures, neutral postures. But I wasn't the only one. In Bloomington, there were so many people injured at the time. We called it Bloomingtonitis, not tendonitis. And you were afraid to come out of the closet because people would label you imagine, as not only a bad musician, but as a bad person, because our identity was so wrapped up in what we did. And, those of us who couldn't play thought our lives were over, it was a dark time, So now I think I was very fortunate to have had that happen when I was still a student. Because when I got to the Minnesota Orchestra and I won the job, there were 6 people sidelined at the time with injuries, but they'd rather call in sick with leprosy than say they had a playing injury. And I thought, okay, we have to do something about this. I have some experience. I have some people that I know. Maybe we can put something together, a conference, and exchange ideas, which snowballed. I ended up being able to go through the University of Minnesota Conferences Center. And we had over 500 attendees at a conference called Playing Her. Almost every state was represented. And it was the first time that musicians could talk to doctors and doctors could talk to musicians. They could learn our jargon. We could learn what were risk factors. After that, my phone was ringing off the hook with people wanting to have information, but they didn't want to talk to anybody else than me, because they didn't trust coming out, with these concerns. So I decided in self-defense to write my book for the layman, for people, musicians, and the healthcare providers that help us. And it's still in print. It sold a lot of books, and I feel very gratified that, it helped put this field of performing arts medicine on the map.
I know the city I used to live in actually has a center for performing arts medicine at their hospital, and it includes music therapists as well as doctors who sort of specialize in treating musicians and opera singers and classical musicians and all sorts of things, which I think is really, really interesting. I'm wondering, from your perspective, do you see that there's more of a culture of acceptance and healing, like literal healing in terms of injury, and people are not being shunned for it anymore?
Oh, yeah, there is. And the reason is not only that we now have some specialists specializing in the actual field of performing arts medicine. It's a thing now. There's a textbook. There's people that are, very knowledgeable. But because sports medicine has really gone leaps and bounds too, as well as the ergonomic industry where people are thinking about, it's not really hard to push down the keys on a computer. How come we're getting all these injuries? So carpal tunnel and some of these injuries were ubiquitous, and we were getting credibility for the repetition that we are subject to that can cause these injuries. And, you don't necessarily have to be weightlifting to sustain an injury like that. So it's the repetition and poor posture and long hours that can result in an injury. So yeah, it's really there's become more awareness about the necessity to look at yourself as an athlete. We're the small muscle Olympians. What we do is just as taxing, only it's not as obvious to the observer. There's only one area that people are still reticent to come out of the closet about, and that's hearing protection, hearing loss. And I'm working on that one because people expose themselves to dangerous decibels every single day. And you can imagine, I think you can imagine how loud it is on stage. It's as loud as a sports game or a rock concert. And you really are jeopardizing your hearing. So yeah, it's been quite a journey in the last, I'd say probably 20, 25 years of where we've come with injury prevention. There are pretty easy things to incorporate in your practice, in your attitude to your instrument. And even the orchestras have incorporated various strategies to help. For example, the Minnesota Orchestra already was doing this. It's been at least 20 years, if not more. They call it work hardening. It's not a great term, but it came from physical therapy and occupational therapy, where when somebody's been injured and they're trying to get them back with PT and OT, that they use the workplace as part of the therapy. So the Minnesota Orchestra, working with the doctors and the insurance companies, figured out a plan. The insurance company says, okay, you're playing again, so I don't want to pay you anymore. Then the doctor says, oh, you're not ready to play the full complement. And the orchestra doesn't want to continue paying a sub once you're able to come back. So how do you fix all those thorny issues? And the way it works with the Minnesota Orchestra is that when the doctor signs off and says, okay, this patient has completed their recovery and their physical therapy, they're ready to go back to the orchestra, but they're only going to be doing this work hardening program for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it is. That initially, the orchestra continues to hire a sub, the insurance continues to pay, and the player just, initially starts with a few minutes, maybe one piece. And then over the next 2-3 weeks, they'll graduate to, okay, maybe 2 pieces, maybe the first half of the program, maybe then finally the entire program, which is then they're back. And the reason that works so well is because I like to compare when you're driving a car, you're in the driver's seat, when you're going to stop and start suddenly, whether you're going to lurch to the left and make a hard, turn. And it's the passenger that goes through the windshield. And being in an orchestra is like that because the conductor's in the driver's seat. You don't know when that person will stop or start suddenly, or have you freeze at the end of a passage, or play something really, really fast or really, really slow. So your motions are more jerky. You're in less control of your motions than you are at home when you're practicing on your own. And that's why there are more injuries at the workplace and in the orchestral setting or band, So this work hardening has worked really well to get people gradually back to the schedule. And that's the most important thing if you do sustain an injury, to understand how athletic it is what we do and to come back very gradually, starting with 5 minutes and adding 5-minute increments. Times at 5 minutes, once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day, before you increase the length of time to 10 minutes. And that way you're not going to hurt yourself again.
That sounds like a good plan. Is it something that other orchestras have adopted as well, or?
There are other orchestras that have adopted similar strategies. Yeah. Mm. But there are some that won't even discuss such things. Mm. So there's still a lot of work to do to get awareness, not only within the orchestra members or, freelancers, but also the presenters, the conductors, the managements.
Yeah. I was wondering, what is something that you would tell a young musician entering the workforce today?
I think the most important thing is to be a self-starter, that not all of us are going to end up either as a soloist or in an elite orchestra, the top 10 orchestras. And there are so many excellent musicians right now. It's just like athletics, it's getting better and better and younger people. I would encourage people to find a niche that somebody else isn't doing and try to develop that idea. There are very interesting other ways to have a life in music or in a creative profession.
Yeah, that is excellent. Excellent advice. 2 more questions for you. One is like a more serious question, and the other one is more of a fun question. Which would you like first?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll end with the fun one.
Okay.
Okay, so serious one first is, in your own words, what does living a creative life mean to you?
I couldn't imagine any other life for myself because I've always performed. I've always written. I've always spoken, been on stage my whole life. And I feel that a creative life feeds you in ways that a 9-to-5 job where you're not fulfilled necessarily, it can't replicate the kind of fulfillment and joy that a creative life gives you.
Excellent. And a fun question. What is one of your favorite movies or TV shows, and what does it reveal about you?
Let's see. Well, I'm going through a Barbra Streisand phase, just accidentally, because we started reading her biography, and I really admire all the amazing things that she did in her life. First a singer, then an actress, then a director and a producer and, script writer. And I mean, she's done it all. And what an example for us. And I think that says a lot about that. I try to emulate that kind of a role model in my life.
Excellent. I definitely think you are doing that for sure. You've taught, you've been in an orchestra, you have a wonderful social media presence, and you bring your wisdom there. And of course, you've got your books, The Cello Still Sings and Playing Less Hurt. So you're definitely making an impact for sure.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Janet, thank you so much for joining the show today. Listeners, please check the show notes for direct links for Janet's website, as well as where to buy her books. Musicians, I highly recommend them. If you're not a musician, I highly recommend you get them for your musician friends. And as always, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Creative Piecemeal. We hope today's episode left you feeling inspired. This podcast is independently created and produced by the host, Tammy Takaishi. More details about today's guest can be found in the show notes, along with links to the podcast's socials, merch store, and ways to support arts organizations AHA Broadway and New Normal Rep, both near and dear to Tammy's heart. Don't forget to visit creativepiecemeal.com, the official podcast website, where you can leave fan mail, write a review, explore Tammy's blog, and discover the growing collection of episodes. Special thanks to our audio engineer, Alex Repetti. Additional narration by Dante Jace. Let's keep celebrating creativity in all its forms.